Welcome back to another episode of FNL Fridays. My name's Teresa, I'm your host, and I'm here to talk about all things fitness, nutrition, and lifestyle. Today's topic is something really important that a lot of people have come to me with questions about, so I wanted to make something quick and easy that you can watch to learn more about how to shop to eat healthy and how to meal prep easily. So of course, if you're going to be meal prepping, the first step is to shop for the food that you're going to be meal prepping. So most of you probably know the basics about what you should be doing when you're shopping, but I'm just going to outline the way that I shop and the way that I tell my clients to shop because this is, I think, the most effective and the easiest way to do it. The first thing is to not shop hungry. That is the biggest thing, and you know it, I know it. If you go into a store and you're ravenous, if you haven't eaten, you're going to buy things that are not on your plan or your list. So that is the first thing. And if you're someone like me who's on the go a lot, and sometimes you just go shopping randomly, keep snacks in your car. That way you can have a snack before you go in and you're not just buying all these things that you want because of your appetite. The next thing is to make sure that you have a plan or a list. So you either have actual food items listed out or you know pretty much exactly what you're going to be eating that week, and you can just think in your head, okay, this is what I'm having for breakfast these days, this is what I'm having for lunch, for snacks, and you can purchase according to that. That's how I shop. I don't use a list for the most part. I kind of eat the same thing every week. So I just go through my days in my head. I think, okay, do I have everything I need for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner, and then just my regular snacks that I always keep on hand. The next most important thing is to read your labels. Fresh produce and meats, things like that, they aren't necessarily going to have nutrition labels on them, but anything in a package will. This is just an example of a label, and if you aren't familiar with how to read labels, the first thing you want to pay attention to is right up at the top where it tells you the serving size. And then from that serving size, it'll tell you the amount of calories, and that should be kind of larger than the rest. That's a new labeling method that I think the FDA approved. So either way, the calories should jump out at you. So after you know the calories per serving, which is really important because most of the time we think a serving is probably more than it actually is. So paying attention to that, all of the anything with a label is going to have fat, carbohydrates, and protein, which are the three major macronutrients, really the only three macronutrients. So you're going to have fat up at the top, and then that's broken down into saturated fat, trans fat, polyunsaturated fat, monounsaturated fat. And to be honest, I wouldn't worry too much about those in general. You kind of want to limit your trans fats. And sometimes not all of these are going to be listed because the food might not contain all of these. So just paying attention to overall how much fat and hopefully keeping the trans fats to a minimum. Then you're going to have carbohydrates, and within carbohydrates, there's going to be fiber and sugar. And again, if there's no fiber or no sugar in the item, then it's probably not going to be listed. And if there's any added sugar, that will be listed here as added sugar. So that's something you also want to watch out for, not having too much added sugar in your foods. So the last one is protein, and that is pretty much always just by itself. There's not really specific types of protein, so it's just going to say protein. Reading your labels, super important. Make sure that you are doing that and getting more familiar with what's in your food. Of course, you want to read the ingredient list as well, but make sure you're kind of understanding the macronutrients that are in your food, the fiber, the added sugars, all that stuff, because that really is important to pay attention to when you're trying to improve your health. Then when you're actually going through the store, ideally you're going to be starting with the fresh produce first. So I generally buy all of my fruits and all of my vegetables first because I try to basically build my diet around fresh produce, fruits and vegetables. So kind of going along the outside of the store, that's generally where all of the produce is. Starting on the outside, doing your produce first. Then after that, I generally go for my proteins and dairy if you eat dairy, so eggs, yogurts, milks, protein. For me, that would be like tofu, seitan, that kind of thing, but it might be chicken, eggs, I might have already said that, and turkey, beef, whatever it is that you're eating. The last thing that I get is my processed food. So if I am buying crackers or pretzels or chips or cookies, coffee creamer, juices, things like that, I usually save those for the end because I try to minimize the amount of packaged and processed food that I get. Remembering that when you are buying things like fruit, pay attention to what kind of fruit you're getting, because if you're buying a bag of dried fruit, that's going to have a lot more sugar in it per serving than a piece of fresh fruit, which has a lot more water in it, of course. So dried fruit does not have water in it. Keeping in mind that when I say fruits and vegetables, I'm talking about like just the original pieces of fruits and vegetables, nothing done to them, not canned, not in syrup, not dried, not sugar coated, whatever other things they do, just the original pieces of fruits and vegetables. Once you have all of your food, the first thing to know about meal prep is that you kind of have to have an idea of what you're going to be prepping. You could just prep a bunch of random things, but for one, that might lead to a lot of food waste because you don't eat everything, but that could also lead to you having a bunch of random things that don't really go together, and then it's harder to make meals out of them. In general, I like to think of my meal prep in macronutrients, right? So making sure I have some source of protein, 1 or 2 sources of carbohydrates, and a couple sources of fats. For me, my sources of protein are pretty much always tofu, seitan, and soy yogurt. For my carbohydrates, I generally have oats or rice or potatoes, some sorts of vegetables like corn that have a little bit more sugar in them. My fats I tend to get from plant sources, so I usually use coconut oil or avocados or olives. Just knowing the types of food that you eat, what you want to be eating, and what you're actually going to do and how you're going to make those into a meal. That's the first part of meal prep. Once you have that down, you want to make sure you can set aside 1 to 2 hours a week. I think that's pretty standard for meal prepping. Some people like to do this, 2 hours on a Sunday. Sunday's a very popular day to meal prep. And other people like to do an hour on Sunday and then maybe an hour on Wednesday. That way you're prepped for about 3 days or 4 days each time. One way that you can save a lot of time is by prepping a lot of things at once. If you try to meal prep all of your different things one at a time, it's going to take you hours. When you're first beginning meal prep, that sometimes can be an issue, and you'll learn what works, what you can do at the same time, and you'll get better at it. But in general, think about all the ways that you can cook at the same time. So you can be baking something while you're cooking something on the stove. If you have a crock pot, you could be putting something in there overnight. I use a steamer for my rice, so I steam my rice while I'm cooking my tofu. You could be chopping your vegetables while something's cooking on the stove, or washing all your fruits and vegetables. So kind of planning ahead and thinking, okay, well, I can maybe bake my chicken while I put rice in the steamer. And then I can wash all of my fruits and vegetables and cut them up into different serving sizes. Something like that. That way it really will only take you an hour, maybe 2 at the most. Just some tips on how I like to prepare my food. In general, I don't really fry anything, and if I do, it's just with a little bit of olive oil spray, so it's not really deep fried. But I like to bake things, saute things. I like to grill things. Once a week we grill. In San Diego we do have more summer than a lot of places. So if you're somewhere that's cold now, or you're not able to grill anymore, then maybe that one's out. Or if you can grill inside, if you have a portable grill or something like that, a George Foreman. Steaming is another really good way where you don't really have to add any oils or anything like that. And those are some of my favorites, especially for my vegetables. But of course, you could also eat those raw. And then as for fruits, I don't really do much with my fruits. I just wash them, and then sometimes I will cut them up. That way they're just easier to access, and I don't have to, if it's a pineapple or an apple or something like that, I don't really have to deal with it. It's just ready to go. The last most important thing is to make sure you have plenty of good Tupperware. And yes, it's kind of a stereotype with meal prepping that, people live out of Tupperware, but that's also just a really convenient way to store everything you've made. And I've had some pretty crappy Tupperware where if it falls over, it spills, it leaks, the lids don't stay on, they're hard to put the lids on. Make sure you invest in quality Tupperware, because otherwise it's going to be really frustrating. Aside from storing your food, one of the things that Tupperware can do for you is it can help you with your portion control. For example, I have this little guy. Now this is 3/4 cup. So, it's not tiny, but it's also, the smallest one I have. So something like this is something that I would use for dressings where, maybe I'd fill it 1/3 or maybe a half of the way, but I use balsamic vinegar for dressing, so it's a little different. But, using something small like this for dressings, or for higher fat foods like nuts and seeds, This will be a good way to make sure that you're just putting a small handful in here, not even filling the whole thing. And that way you can pay attention to the amount of food you're eating. If I put almonds in this one, that would easily be 2 to 3, maybe even 4 servings of almonds. And a serving of almonds is almost 200 calories. So in general, you want to be really careful about things like fats and use smaller containers for them. This one is 1 cup. So this is something I might use for rice or potatoes or some sort of carbohydrate. This one is 2.5 cups. For this one, I might put fruit in here. I might put fresh veggies. And if I'm doing fruit, I might not fill the whole thing. But again, you can see that that's maybe the size of a large orange or something like that. The last one that I have is 4 cups. And this would be perfect for like a salad. So building my base with my lettuce and my vegetables, and then maybe just topping that with protein, which maybe I would put my protein in this one. So I would use this for something like salads, maybe even a soup or something like that. That's not super calorie dense. It's not super heavy because this is a very large portion. It's 4 cups. So this could easily be a whole meal. Also, just remember that a lot of the things that you might buy at the store that are processed or that are packaged, you could probably make those things yourself. For example, like coffee creamer, dressing, sauces, even chips, soups, stuff like that. You can make all that stuff pretty easily yourself. I make my own coffee creamer with just coconut milk and a little bit of sugar and flavoring, and that usually lasts for about a week, just because I prefer not to have all of the preservatives that processed coffee creamers have. You can make a lot of those processed things at home yourself. That way there's less preservatives, less additives, and you know exactly what's going into it. So especially if you're someone with allergies or food intolerances, that would be a really great way for you to be able to control exactly what you're putting into your body. If you don't consider yourself someone who likes to cook, or maybe you just don't have time to actually do the extra meal prep, there are plenty of items out there that are already prepped for you. So you've probably seen, zucchini noodles and chopped up veggies, chopped up fruits, even some meats that are pre-cooked, and all you have to do is heat them up. Granted, those are usually filled with sodium, so I avoid those, but there are plenty of items out there. So if you think meal prep is something that you can't do because you don't have an hour or 2 a week, you absolutely can. You just have to find the things that are going to work for you and possibly pay a little bit more for it. Those are my tips on how to shop to eat healthy and easily meal prep. I hope this was really helpful for you. If you're someone who meal preps or someone who wants to start meal prepping, please like this video. Feel free to share it as well, and don't forget to subscribe so that you get a new video every Friday from me. I'll talk to you next week, and have a great weekend.